Welcome to Sartor TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have L. David Marquet join us today. Mr. Marquet is a retired U.S. Navy captain and author of the book Turn the Ship Around, which focuses on leadership, and he joins us virtually today. David, thank you so much for joining us today. So nice to have you.
Thanks for having me on the show, Vaishali.
So tell us why you decided to write this book.
Well, I had this experience where we turned the submarine around, and it happened over the course of a couple of years. And then I left the ship. And there are a lot of books out there about, they're basically, I call them, I came, I saw, I conquered. Like the great person, typically a man, came, turned something around, and it's about them. And what happened on the submarine was, because of the way we did it, which was building and investing in other leaders and trying to not make it about my personality, over the next 10 years, we had a highly disproportionate number of the officers and chiefs and enlisted men got it promoted. And so I realized that was the story I want to tell. So the hook is simply, oh, we turned a submarine around. But the real story is when you do it by giving your people control and decision-making ability, you develop leaders, and then they go on and do great things. And that was the story I felt was important.
Now, classic leadership theory says there are leaders and there are followers. What are your thoughts on this theory?
Yeah, so I think it's an assumption we don't even question because it's so ingrained. Like, there's deciders and there's doers. There's leaders and there's followers. There's thinkers and there's people who sort of execute the decision of the thinking class. And what we learned was, if you can push that thinking all the way down through the organization and get people doing more thinking. And so it's not like we don't give up the doing. We got to keep the doing, but we're injecting thinking more and more in the organization. It becomes much more powerful because the most untapped resources in any organization is everybody's brain, not the CEO's brain, because he or she's probably pretty engaged, but it's the next level, the next level, the next level. And those people are smart and they got a lot of great ideas, and we just got to help them get it out of them.
You talk a bit about empowerment in your book as well. And one thing that you said was sometimes when leaders would try to empower you, it almost felt like manipulation. Tell us about that and what you've learned about empowerment as a leader.
Yeah, I think empowerment's one of those words where we're sort of pretending to give people control, but we're really not, because it's like, I'm the one who chooses to empower you. So that's really not true empowerment. My kids are grown up in their 20s now, but at the time they were younger. And I was always struck about when you look at a two-year-old or a 5-year-old, like, they don't need to be empowered. Like, they just do stuff. But somehow we beat it out of them, and then we try and put it back into them. And I'm like, well, let's just skip the part in the middle. And so I think people are naturally have power. It's arrogant for me to say, oh, I give you power, like I put power into you, empower. No, what I need to do is get out of your way, and what we say is create the environment so that people can exercise the power that's within.
The USS Olympia mission was considered successful because the leader-follower model provided short-term success. So how does this particular model provide success for the short term but not the long term?
Right, because in the leader-follower model, we associate the performance of the organization very strongly with the personality of the leader. So if the organization does well while the leader's there and the leader leaves and the organization goes like this, we take that as a sign of strong leadership. And I don't agree with that. I think if it's strong, that's strong achievement because the leader or whoever's in charge made good decisions. But if the organization goes like this after they leave, they didn't convey whatever they had to their people, and they kind of kept it to themselves, whether deliberately or not. And I think it's much more powerful. Leadership is when the leader leaves and the organization keeps going like that, because we've conveyed goodness, whatever we have, to the group, and we haven't like made it, oh, that's my secret sauce and I'm taking my sauce with me when I go, which is what we see over and over and over again. And we actually reward, we go like this and we say, oh, we need to bring that person back.
What can we do to incentivize this type of long-term thinking?
We need to reward the leader for what happens after they leave. In other words, if I said to you, look, you're the general manager of this plant, and you're going to be there for 3 years, and then we're going to promote you, and we're going to put you at a bigger plant, but I'm going to evaluate this plant, or I'm going to evaluate you on how your plant does for a year after you leave. What's happening is a lot of people say, oh, well, that's kind of unfair because there's some variables I can't control. But what happens in the mind of the leader is, oh my gosh, I need to figure out whatever it is that's making this run, and I have to get it down to the people. So rather than me running around and making everything happen, I got to create an organization where the people just embed the values and they take initiative and be proactive without me. And I think that kind of thinking is really, really powerful.
Tell us a little bit about what leaders have to give up mentally and emotionally, yet still retain full control.
It's hard because we're all wired to want to be in control. That's how mammals and humans are wired. So one of the activities that we have our CEOs do, who we coach, is we say, okay, the next 10 times you go to a restaurant, you don't get to order your dinner. I want you to just turn to the waiter and say, you pick for me. Now, if you have like a food allergy, you can say, no peanuts, but I don't want you to say, you pick me 3 and I'll choose 1. That's not what I'm talking about saying. Like, I don't even want you to know what it is until it shows up. Because you have to practice what it feels like to give control. If you can't even give a control up of your dinner, how can you go to work? And then when a project team comes in and says, oh, we have an idea, you say, well, great, why don't you guys do that? And we'll see how it goes. Because you're going to always want to control things. So we have to feel the discomfort. There's got to be a verge of discomfort because you're going to be giving up control. We control the structure and the system, and we provide long-term intent. I think that's fine. But in terms of giving instructions, you want to try and get out of that. And so you got to give up that sort of comfort of, oh, I know everything, I'm micromanaging everything, I'm in control of everything. That's what you got to give up.
You also talk about your experience with the USS Santa Fe, which had one of the worst reputations. And when you entered the ship, one of the first things that you noticed was the crew and how the crew seemed a little bit embarrassed, a little bit dejected. And what you did was started by asking a structured set of questions. Tell us about that process and what you learned.
Yeah, so I was supposed to be the captain of the Olympia, and things would have been fine. The Olympia was doing well. And at the very last minute, I went to the Santa Fe, which was the worst performing ship in the Navy and had the worst morale. We know that's true because it had the fewest number of sailors who wanted to stay in the Navy. And that's a measure of how much people like it. And when I walked on board the submarine, I only had 2 weeks to get ready. On the Olympia, it's a year-long school to learn every single detail. But for Santa Fe, it's like very last minute I went over there. And so I'm walking through the passageway. People are like slumped over. They're shuffling along. It's like The Walking Dead. You know, they're just zombies. And the reason I was there is because their captain had quit a year early. So they were already bummed out. And then their captain quit. And then they get this new guy. And I was really kind of tempted to kind of put my stamp on how things were, but instead I kind of held back a little bit, and I asked these questions. I said, well, because I want to tap into their fears. I said, well, like, what are you afraid that I'm going to do, like right away? What are you afraid I'm going to change? What would you really like me to change? And what's in the way of getting your job done? What are the barriers? I went in with the assumption that even though everyone said this was the worst crew in the Navy, that they actually wanted to do a good job, and that there was something in the air that was preventing them from doing their jobs. And they told me all these stories, and I was right. They basically were there trying to do a good job, and there were just these barriers. And the barrier was this very top-down leadership where mistakes were highly criticized. So the mindset was, don't screw up. Whatever happens, don't make even the tiniest mistake. And that just paralyzes you. It's just because the best way to not make a mistake is just like sit in your cubicle and don't do anything.
You also talk about technical competence a bit in your book. So, to what extent does technical competence form the basis of leadership?
So what you're trying to do is give your people control. And, or, some people say, I'm trying to empower my people. The problem is control means decision-making ability. And on a nuclear submarine, it's not like, well, I feel this. It's like there's laws of nature, which if you don't do it right, bad things will happen. So technical competence forms the basis, which allows me to give you control. If you don't have any technical competence, if you don't know how the reactor operates, I can't give you any decision-making for the reactor. The degree to which you can build your technical competence, your skill, and you can demonstrate what it is, and we're honest about what it is for our group, which means giving a lot of exams and testing it, which a lot of organizations are unwilling to do. They don't test their people's technical competence. So as a result, we don't really know what it is. And the best thing to do is just kind of assume it's low. And therefore, that's my excuse. Well, I'm not sure you really know, so I'm going to make the decision for you.
So then what are some things that leaders should consider when they're thinking of implementing change in their organizations?
So the problem is, like if you called change progress, and you say, well, does anyone like progress? Yeah, oh, we all love progress. Oh, we hate change. People don't like being changed, right? That's the problem. So me coming in and saying, I'm going to come change you because you're all screwed up, and so now I have to fix you. That's the problem. So we never talked about change. We just said we're going to run some experiments. And it feels sort of light, it's temporary, and the focus is on learning. So let's try this. If it works, great. If you don't like it, we'll stop doing it. And that takes this whole sort of heaviness of, oh, we're going to have a change initiative, and let me convince you. And it just takes all that out of the way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we always focused on the behavior. So we always, the phrase was we act our way to new thinking. In other words, I would say, hey, look, why don't we just try saying this? Say we, not they, for example. Well, we, and so instead of referring to the other department as they, those guys over in marketing or supply or whatever it is, it's like we. And let's see how that feels. Like, let's try that for a month. And it was awesome, and it started feeling like we. So let's keep doing that. So, but I didn't give people a lecture and hit them on the head and say, well, you need to act like a team and think like a team and feel like a team. I just say the word we. And so it's act our way to new thinking, not think our way to new action, which is the way most change programs get tripped up.
Now, the other thing that you found was that the leader-follower model was quite pervasive on the ship, and your crew was just doing what they were told to do. So
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about why this is a problem. What are some things that you did to change this?
My instinct initially was to say, well, look, you guys need to be proactive. You guys need to take initiative. I need you guys to come to me with your ideas. But it was in an environment where, as the captain, I was given all the orders. So the way I think about it now is like I was leaning into them, and there was no room for them to lean into me. So saying to my people, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, was a bit of an abdication of my own responsibility for my behavior. And what I realized was it starts with me. And what I could do was actually suppress my appetite to tell them what to do. And so I made a deal. I'm never going to give another order, and I'm going to back up. I'm going to slowly stop telling you what to do, or actually quickly in some cases, and that will create the room for you to come to me and say, here's what we intend to do. And this was the word that was really powerful for us, intent. And they would come up and say, this is what I intend to do. And it meant, unless I said no, it was going to happen. They were going to do it. And they would say, I've done the research. Here's why it's the right thing. Here's why it's going to support our mission. Here's what I intend to do. And then they would open themselves up to scrutiny. They would say, okay, check, I'm happy to answer any questions. Not, they wouldn't get defensive. Oh, why are you asking me questions, right? And that was very powerful because it invited them to think at the next level.
How can leaders tell that their procedures and their methods are reinforcing this leader-follower model?
You got to just kind of step back and think, who's taking ownership of this job? So, for example, let's say I got a guy who's responsible for a project, and I walk down to his office or her office, and I say, "Hey, give me a status update." I'm poaching their ownership because now I'm basically running the job, right? Versus if they come to me and say, "Hey, boss, let me give you a status update," it's theirs. And so we need to like sit back and wait for those status updates to come. Now, if they don't come, we need to talk to our people and say, "Look, when are you going to give me some updates on this job?" And I'd like, let's have an agreement. But then I'm going to wait for you to come to me, and your job is to come to me so frequently that I never get that sort of queasy feeling and my desire to, I'm wondering what's going on, and I come down to your office. If that happens, you failed. But if you do that, then you can take control and ownership of your job rather than me swooping in and really being in control.
What are some things that you did to ensure that your employees were achieving excellence and not just avoiding mistakes?
So one of the problems we had was the mindset for people was to avoid errors, and that biases them towards avoiding making decisions and taking responsibility. And so we would just talk about what we were trying to achieve in a positive way. Now, it was a little bit, you had to be careful because I didn't want to send a message that making mistakes was okay, especially in a nuclear submarine. But the idea was if we move toward excellence, we will be moving away from error-prone behavior. That moving toward excellence, the natural consequence would be a diminishment of errors, as opposed to our focus is on let's get away from the errors wherever we end up going. No, let's give ourselves a focus point and go towards excellence in operations and picture what that means. And oh, by the way, we'll be moving away from error activity.
You also talk a little bit about manager and manager mindset. So how do you shift manager mindset from one of a position of privilege to one of accountability and responsibility and work?
So we had some mid-level people on the submarine who had the mistaken idea that as they advanced in their rank, they had more privilege. And the way I saw it was as you advanced in rank, you had more responsibility to take care of more and more people because you had more influence and the ability to control more things. So we talked about taking care of our people, but they really weren't getting it. And then we finally made a rule that you can have a better duty rotation than the people below you. So in other words, if the junior-most people were standing watch 6 hours on and 6 hours off, that meant that the senior-most people would stand watch 6 hours on and 6 hours off. And that's not the way it used to be. Now, there was a lot of grumbling about that, but the leader has to control the structure and write the algorithms essentially for the organization. And what happened was they said, wow, that's really terrible. In other words, now we're eating the same dog food that the crew is eating. And they said, well, this is kind of terrible, so we got to make it better for the crew, and that'll make it better for us. So it initially started in a selfish way, but as a result, it made it better for everybody. And then we understood, oh, that's what taking care of our people is like. So rather than the manager just kind of like going through the motions, we had to inject the thinking and the behaviors of taking care of our people and get away from sort of the old stereotypes of, rank has its privileges.
So then what were some of the things that you did when you found that there was a lot of resistance to change on the ship?
We had a lot of guys who got on board right away, and they really loved it. Because when you go to someone and you say, hey, do you want more ability to control your job? Do you want more decision making? Do you want to be the one you want to decide when, how, what order you're going to work on things? They're like, yeah. And we did have some people who thought that wasn't such a good idea. They just wanted to be told what to do. And my approach was to ignore them. Just put all my energy in the people who were trying hard And eventually those people would elbow the guy and, hey man, get with a program here. Like, we're all doing this, and that's how it works. So I just ignored them.
And it worked? They came around?
It worked, yeah. Well, 99% came around. We had 2 guys who found a reason to transfer off the submarine. We didn't have to fire them necessarily, but they really felt uncomfortable. And so we found other places in the Navy for them to work in a very respectful way. But, yeah, they just were never going to go there. Well, maybe eventually, but the sun would be a black hole by the time that happened.
Tell us how you found short conversations to be a mechanism of control and a way to sort of increase effectiveness of an organization.
So what happened to me was the crew's preparing charts for one of our underway, and like any team, when they go to the boss, they want to have a finished product that's good and ready to go. But that prevented them from just coming and checking with me and saying, hey, are we on the right track? Are we going to go this way around the island or this way around? I mean, some very basic questions. And so they'd spend a whole lot of time plotting one course and making sure that was perfect when really we needed to go this way. And had they just come up right at the beginning and say, kind of, here's what we're thinking, just 30 seconds, this or this. Like, yeah, I think we're going to end up going this way. Okay, it would have saved everybody's time. But the time of the executives in the corporation is typically highly visible and is valuable. And so we overprotect that time to the detriment of the team. And then the other thing is we're stuck on 30-minute schedules. For some reason, like, I can't come and schedule a 3-minute thing. So one of the things we recommend that leaders do is just do speed dating. Okay, here's a 30-minute block. The first 10 people who show up are going to get 3 minutes with me. And they can come in, they can say, here's what we're thinking. They want to get some reactions. Great. Walk out. That's it. And the timer goes off. And what happens is, since they know they only got three minutes with the CEO, they're going to be very to the point and precise.
So how do you get senior managers and leaders to be more proactive in an organization and more passive followers to become more active?
You got to go step by step, and it's about you. Don't give them a lecture. Hey, I need you to be more active. It's like, look at your own behavior. What are you doing that's causing them is suppressing whatever that initiative is? And then, so when they come to you and like, hey, I got a problem. What should I do about this? You know the answer, and you want to say, oh, here's what you should do. But you got to resist. You got to not do that. You got to say, well, hey, tell me more. What's the story? How do you see it? So the very first step is just simply description, like, tell me more about it. But actually, the step before that is you have to just shut up and not give the answer, even though you know it. If you don't know the answer, it's easy to say, yeah, well, let's look at it together. What do you guys think? But pretend like you don't know the answer. And then say, well, what do you think? Tell me what you see. Tell me more about it in a very neutral way, and then get them talking. Hey, well, what do you think's going on? Okay, so what should we do? If you were me, what would you do? If I weren't here, what would you do? If you had to make this decision now and you couldn't talk to me, what would you do? If your decision were on the signature line and we had to publish it to the shareholders, what would you do? These are some of the questions you can ask. Get them out of their little perspective into a broader perspective for the organization. Looking back on themselves, it'll be a less emotional, healthier, more detached. And they'll say, oh, well, we should do this. Okay, great. Why did you do that?
So then, as a leader, what are some of the things that you did to resist the urge to provide solutions?
You got to get plenty of sleep, and you got to eat right, because whenever you're like haven't slept right, you're under stress, you didn't eat right, you don't feel good, what happens is that sends you back to your reptile brain, and you're about fight, flight, or freeze mode, and because this requires you to basically exercise discipline over your reactions, which are, I just want to tell you what to do, right? Oh, just do this. I see the answer. Why aren't you guys doing this? And every time you exercise willpower and you say, no, don't do that, sit back, be neutral, find out, like, they must have a reason for what they're doing. Let's investigate that. It depletes your brain resources. You only have a certain amount of ability for willpower. We all know this, right? You go to a conference, they have a bunch of donuts out. You don't want to eat a donut. 8 o'clock, easy, skip the donut. 9 o'clock break, skip the donut. 10 o'clock break, skip the donut. 11 o'clock break, finally like, oh, yeah, just get the donut. It's because your ability to resist has been depleted by those decisions. And so you got to take care of yourself in a way. And you got to remember that you're going to end up repeating the same message over and over again. And I felt like that, again, was a wrong behavior, but it's correct, because the difference is the leader saying different things all the time, which is very confusing to people. And even though you've said it 100 times, you may have said it 100 times to 100 different people. It might be the first time this person is really hearing it. So you got to repeat the message consistently, unemotionally, and you got to stay the course, and you got to take care of yourself.
Now, you as a leader were inadvertently sending messages that was eroding responsibility and ownership among your subordinates. What was happening at that time?
We had this weekly meeting where we had this big binder of everything that the different department heads were supposed to be doing. And it was like this accountability meeting where the department heads would report, here I am on item 75, 76, 77, okay, over to you, engineer, here's my status, here's operations. And it was this sort of horrific teeth-pulling meeting. No one liked it. And I realized, why am I telling them, why am I keeping track of their jobs? It seemed like simply the fact that I was keeping track of their jobs really took ownership away from them. And if you're a department head or a vice president, and your CEO saying, you know what, I'm not going to keep track of anything. I'm not going to have a list of secret projects I want you to work on or not secret projects. It's up to you. And if you want to come update me, great. If not, that's on you. And because what happens is, once that happens, it's so liberating. You own the job. And sure, did they not do some things that I wish we had done? Yeah. But the power of them feeling like, this is my job, and I'm not doing this just to make somebody else happy. I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing to do. That internalization was so powerful. It activated all this thinking and engagement. Like, you want to get people engaged, just give them decision-making authority. That's all you got to do, and stop having them report 10 times a day on what things are happening. So I realized we had all these rituals for way we did business, which were kind of taking us back into this tell me what to do mode.
You also found that there was no mechanism for your staff to express doubt or uncertainty, ambiguity. What did you do to change this, and what were some of those mechanisms that weren't allowing them to do that?
You got to start your questions with how. We're so used to, let's say a person comes up to you and says, I think we should turn left here. Are you sure? Will we be on time? The questions we tend to ask tend to be this binary, yes, no. Are you sure? Yes, no. And that doesn't invite probabilistic critical thinking. And it also is scary because people generally say, well, yes, because that's they fake it. They're never sure. Anything about the future is never sure. So it makes no sense. So we would say, how? So start with how. How sure are you? How likely it is it will be on time? Here's another one. Is it safe? That's a meaningless question. Is it safe? How? What do you mean? No, it's not safe. Just getting in I get in a car, I drive. Is it safe? How would you answer the question? It's mostly safe. So people either say yes, it's safe, or no, it's not safe. Either way, you don't learn anything. So we say, how safe is it? And people we have a tool called Fist to 5. So we say, is it safe? Yes. Is it safe? Yes. Is it safe? Yes. Or no. We say, how safe is it? 0 to 5. 5 out of 5. Then one day people start going 4. I can detect that. If I say, is it safe, yes or no, it's really hard for someone to say, today we flipped from yes to no. But it's easy to say I flipped from 5 safe to 4 out of 5. well, the team's tired, we have a new person, this is something we've never done before. So I think it's pretty well planned, but it's not quite as safe as normal. Now I notice that, right? You have to ask a question which makes it easy for you to detect the signal in the answer. And yes, no questions don't do that.
Sure. So how does this translate into the corporate world?
Yeah, you start, same deal. Hey, we're going to make an acquisition. We're going to start a new product line. So here's a typical meeting. So we've talked about it. We're gonna initiate this new product line. Are we all in? Like, that's meaningless. Oh, of course, yeah, sure, we're in. How about if there's an assumption? This is based on the following assumption that 100,000 people will move to Southern Florida in the next 6 months. Okay, how likely is it that the assumption will come true? Now we can vote. Now I explore the outliers. That's the whole point of this. So if a whole bunch of people are voting 5s and 4s, I got one person on the team who votes a 1. I'm really curious about what that person sees that we don't see. We don't say, oh, let me explain why you're wrong. That's the normal response. I'm like, okay, I see John's got a different, Vishali's got a different opinion. Like, what do you see that we're not seeing?
How do you use outside groups and social media and audits, for example, to help improve your organization?
It depends on your mindset, right? If your mindset is we got to be good, then you're going to view all these guys as challengers, and you're going to react. If you get criticism, you're going to be defensive about it. But if your mindset is I want to get better, then you view all these people as help, and they are providing very valuable external perspectives on how you guys are doing. I mean, in my head, like, I'm the most awesome, like, keynote delivery person ever, who ever lived. But then people give me comments, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see I could do better with that. I could have structured it better, made it clear, left you with something more concrete to do, whatever. So the idea is, do you want to get better, or are you trying to protect some kind of a reputation of being good? And we'd encourage you to don't be good, get better, and invite. The word we use is invite scrutiny. We also have this thing going on where people say, oh, let's do some training on how to give feedback. I don't care, right? What I want is training on how to solicit feedback. Like, I want my team to be interested in feedback. One of the things we have is these yellow cards. So I give my team a yellow card and I say, pick something. Like, I want to be a better listener. So if you don't feel like I'm really listening to you, I want you to throw the yellow card on me, right? And so I'm inviting you to give me feedback on how I'm doing.
So then when it comes to things like training, how is it that leaders can ensure that they're building out the right training programs and building out the right competencies that they need to get the job done?
Right, well, the normal way is I'm going to do a training program, and then when you completed the training, then I'm going to give you more authority. The problem is those competencies may or may not be the ones that you actually need. So what we encourage you to do is give people a little more authority. Even it can be imaginary, like intent is in some ways just imaginary authority, because you're not actually doing it until I acknowledge, or you still give me a chance to say no, but say, hey, I intend to launch a new product or delay the product release or whatever it happens to be. It will expose any gaps in the competencies, and then we do the training only on those gaps, and it creates a more efficient training process. So the idea is leaders trust first, giving more authority, which shines a light on the technical gaps, which then I address. That's much faster and more efficient.
How do you go from mistakes being events that just happen to actually reducing them through deliberate action?
So I think this idea of injecting a moment of decision before the action is really important. And so what we would do is, let's say this mic is a knob, and I would say, I'm going to turn the knob. And most times the sailors would say, turn the knob, and they'd basically be saying it as they were turning it. and there was no pause, there was no deliberation. And so we would say, turning the knob, and then we'd have them pause just for a moment. Turning the knob, turn. And the interesting thing was, the purpose was to inject a moment of thinking in their mind. Is my hand on the right knob? Am I turning it in the right direction? Is this really what I want to do? But at the same time, because they vocalized it and then they paused, maybe the person next to them on either side would see, oh, hey, you got your hand on the wrong knob. And so then they would speak up, and we could stop the action before the mistake happened versus, oh, turning the knob, oh, it was the wrong knob, or I turned it the wrong way, right? It's already happened, as opposed to turning the knob, hands off. Oh, I think your hand was on the wrong knob. Okay, let's try again. So that's what we call deliberate action. It was that pause between the instinct to do something and the act of doing it.
You also noticed that there was a fundamental practice that was inhibiting your staff from thinking at that next level. Tell us about that.
Well, people basically wanted to be told what to do, because it's always more comfortable to say, well, it's not my responsibility, my boss told me to do it. And so the more I was sucked into that sort of behavior as a leader, doing that and telling people what to do, and we have this over and over again. Now, I don't know what the results of the two recent Navy collisions are, the Fitzgerald and the McCain. They haven't been released, but we do know from a collision that happened on a submarine several years ago. If you read the report, for the 30 minutes before the collision, the captain, 10 times in the report, it has words like the captain ordered, the captain directed. And the problem isn't that the captain finally made an order that was bad. The problem was the structure in which the captain is giving all these orders. Because in that sense, you have only one person is doing the thinking, the rest of the people are just doing what they're told. And in this particular case on the submarine, a sailor saw something, but he was reticent, he didn't say anything, and 7 people died. So the problem is the degree to which we tell people to do. We're throwing cold water on their ability to think and take responsibility for things. And when you remove that, you get a lot better outcomes and better decisions.
What are some mechanisms that leaders can spot that they have a good employee who's being overworked but underappreciated?
The sides of stress, sometimes people will hide it because everyone wants to be kind of tough, but I would see it in the crew. If they started getting tired and stressed out, they would start snipping at each other. They would start snapping. The social formalities would go away. I would say, hey, good morning, how's it going? And so those are all little signs that maybe we're just putting too much pressure on the team, and we need to back off on the operational tempo a little bit. The other thing is, it's the easiest thing to do. I would call it catch my people doing something right. It's the easiest thing to do. I would walk around the ship trying to catch them doing good things, which was 99.9 times out of 100, and then say, oh, you're doing a good job with that, or I appreciate how you're doing this, and you looks like you really did a significant amount of research for that, and I appreciate that. And it's free. It's free. The ROI is infinite.
How does allowing initiative from the bottom work in a crisis?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that this all goes away in a crisis, and it might, but the reason it goes away in a crisis is because the team has not been prepared, and so they're in a low competence or a low clarity situation, and that induces the leader to go back to take control. But in the right environment, if the team knows how to respond, in a fire, for example, then the more chaotic, the more fast-moving, the more important something is, it's actually more important that everybody's thinking and making decisions, because otherwise they're all channeling information up to some central node, and that node quickly becomes bottlenecked because we have to convey, oh, there's a fire in this electrical panel. Well, you don't know what that means. Is that just some smoke coming out the top? Is it the whole thing's bursted into flames? Like, what is that? Like, the person who says it, they see it, they know what it means. but you don't know what it means. And so you respond in a certain way, assuming you know what it means. Versus if we just give them the authority to make decisions to respond to the fire, well, should we use just a portable extinguisher, or do we need full-blown fire hoses and that kind of thing? So our experience is, even in emergencies, training the team to operate with intent was a big winner. If you look at, say, for example, the Fukushima reactor plant, there were some heroic actions afterwards, but they didn't take some actions that they probably could have taken because they needed permission from the CEO, and it was too far to make that step, and for them to say, oh, we're going to act without getting permission.
One thing that you learned was the importance of taking care of your employees, and that also meant taking care of them beyond work and sort of understanding what's going on in their lives outside of work as well. Tell us about your experience with this.
Well, the Navy's a pretty all-encompassing job. I mean, we get on a submarine, we go away for 6 months, and we're all living, sleeping, eating together. And you want it to be about, oh, just get your job done, and I don't really, your personal life problem. But there are people, and they have things that they're trying to achieve in their lives. So we would ask the sailors, what are you trying to achieve in your life? Now, the traditional thing was, oh, keep the good sailors in the Navy. But sometimes the good sailors would say, you know what, I want to start my own electronics company. I want to do something. I want to go to college. I want to whatever. And then we would say, okay, great. How can we help you with that? And we would allocate more time to study. The Navy has a good program where you can bring college courses at sea, and we exploited that program to the hilt. And we got a lot of guys signed up. They got a lot of college credit, and when they sailors saw, oh, we care about them as people, boom, they gave everything. They gave 110%.
Now, if an organization has a rich legacy, how can leaders go about taking advantage of that?
So one of the things that's important is for when you give people decision-making authority, is they need to align the criteria for the decision to whatever the organization is trying to do. And we have organizations which are born and do well, and then somehow kind of lose their way, or they grow really big, and they kind of lose sight of that impetus of, like, why did the people who founded IBM found IBM, or Con Edison, or General Electric, and what was the original vision for those companies? So we what we call it is organizational storytelling. Like, let's collect stories. Let's not forget that original story, but let's continue to collect stories that kind of go with the organization's purpose, and then let's put them all in a book. And the idea is people will like the stories. They'll remember the story about when Sally went out of her way to help a client and drove a truck 2 hours, even though she didn't have to deliver something to a client who really needed it. They'll remember that, not some policy document that says, oh, we go the extra mile to help our client. Like, what is, I don't know what that means. But we all remember, like, Sally giving up her Saturday to drive across the state of Florida and deliver something, even though she could have just said, oh, well, we don't do deliveries on Saturday.
Exactly.
It's the stories that people remember.
Can you talk a little bit about guiding principles and how leaders can use guiding principles to help set up their organizations for success?
Yeah. So too many times what we see at guiding principles are some poster on the wall or something on the website. No one reads them. They don't even know what they are. And they're written, and I think one of the problems is they're written too abstractly. So we worked together on our guiding principles, and our guiding principles were described in a behavioral way. So, for example, integrity was one, and the description was, look, we say the truth, even if it means I'm going to be personally embarrassed by what comes out. Or I might embarrass somebody else. But our dedication to the truth is more important than any temporary discomfort from an emotional basis. Or timeliness, which means we show up on time. Our meetings start on time with whoever is in the room. We don't wait for the captain to show up or anything like that. And so all of our principles, and I lay them all out in my book, Turn the Ship Around, but all the principles for the ship are written in this sort of behavioral way. So it wasn't just a word, it meant this is what I do. It was 5 minutes before the meeting. I'm not in the meeting room yet. I better go because the principle of timeliness is that the meeting's going to start on time.
So tell us what guidance you give leaders to help them build a leader-leader organization rather than a leader-follower organization.
Starts with you. Step one, stop telling people what to do. Ask them what they see.
That's the number one thing.
Yeah. Stop telling people what to do. Just stop. Stop it.
Well, David, this was great. Your book is filled with some great information and leadership lessons, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on Starter TV.
And we'll see you next time on Starter TV.